Good evening and welcome to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I'm Robert Spencer, and tonight the topic once again is the war on free speech. We have devoted several episodes of this show earlier on to the war on free speech, and we're returning to it tonight. Pamela Geller will be joining us at the top of the hour to discuss this in greater depth, and it is a pressing moment to discuss this because it is one of the foremost challenges to free societies in our age or in any age. And yet, the war on free speech is pretty much on no one's radar screen. Nobody's talking about it. It was not an issue in the recent presidential campaign. It is not something that is being discussed in the mainstream media. And yet, the war on free speech is raging more hotly than pretty much any challenge to our freedoms today. Note, for example, the fact that in Benghazi, there's been a great deal of discussion about the jihad attack against the Benghazi consulate and the apparent fact that the Obama administration knew that it was al-Qaeda jihad terrorists who had attacked the consulate and covered up that fact for reasons of their own. Obviously, they funded and aided the rebels in Libya, and so they would look very bad if those rebels then turned on them and murdered the ambassador who had sneaked into Libya in the waning days of the Gaddafi regime in order to help those same rebels. But what's more interesting about that, or perhaps of greater moment for the future of the United States and the free world in general, is the way in which the Obama administration chose to cover up this terrorist involvement. They instead blamed the video, the notorious video of Muhammad, the Innocence of Muslims video, which supposedly was the linchpin for riots that have been raged in the weeks that followed the consulate attack around the Islamic world. Now, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, Jay Carney, and others all said that the attack on the consulate was because of this video. And that's what it was all about. Now, it's very noteworthy that they would have fastened on a video that criticizes or presents in a critical light the founder of or the ostensible founder of Islam. The implication of that is that the attack was all our fault. It was our freedom of speech, our freedom of expression that led to the Benghazi attack. And if we would just stop insulting Muslims, supposedly by telling the truth about Muhammad or the truth about Islam, then there wouldn't be any riots, there wouldn't be any killings, there wouldn't be any attacks. And so we had the very strange spectacle of the United States government going on record implicitly blaming one aspect of the United States Constitution, indeed the principal and foremost aspect of it, the freedom of speech, in order to explain what happened, or ostensibly to explain what happened in this attack on the consulate. Now, this is not the first or only time when the Obama administration has gone on record against the freedom of speech. Most notoriously, the Obama administration signed on to Resolution 1618 of the United Nations, in which the United Nations called upon member states to criminalize what they called incitement to religious hatred. Now, nobody is really in favor of hatred or of incitement. But the problem is that hatred and incitement are subjective things. And the person who would get to decide what is criminal incitement or criminal hatred is the one who has the power to control the public discourse. The Resolution 1618, in calling for incitement to religious hatred, was following the lead of the of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is the 57 government Islamic group that is now the foremost voting bloc at the UN. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has been pushing for years to get the United Nations to call upon member states to criminalize first what it called defamation of religions and now incitement to religious hatred. Now, here again, nobody's in favor of hatred or defamation. Nobody really is wanting to have the ability to incite or create hatred. But these things are terms that are used to refer to speaking the truth about how Islamic jihadis use the texts and teachings of Islam in order to precisely incite religious hatred and to justify acts of violence and to make recruits among peaceful Muslims. It is the Islamic jihadis in using the texts and teachings of Islam who are performing any real incitement. But as far as the OIC and the resolution at the UN is concerned, that's not what's incitement. What's incitement is saying that there are these texts that are violent, there are these teachings of Muhammad that are violent, Quranic texts that are violent, and that Islamic jihadis are using them. That is what they consider to be incitement to religious hatred. The OIC has been very clear about this in actually including counter-terror analysis in its a definition of what constitutes Islamophobia, so-called. So that means that if these incitement to religious hatred or defamation of religion laws actually became the law of the land in the United States, it would be against the law to examine how the motives and goals of jihad terrorists in order to understand what they're all about. It would be forbidden. And that would leave the West, the free world in general, mute and hence defenseless in the face of the jihad onslaught. That's the goal of these so-called incitement and or hate speech laws. The Obama administration signed on to Resolution 1618 at the UN. It agreed to this with the proviso that, of course, states that had something like the First Amendment, they couldn't implement laws of this kind right away, but should work toward them. And Hillary Clinton said, well, of course, we have the freedom of speech, but she said we need to practice good old-fashioned public shaming of those who get out of line and say something that's critical of Islam and so on. And obviously, it is being critical of Islam is what these laws are all about. Nobody is up in arms, nobody is rioting, nobody is killing when Christianity is insulted. When a crucifix is placed in a jar of urine, it's celebrated as art and given a National Endowment for the Arts grant. Nobody is rioting or killing. So the implication here is that one may riot and kill, and that will get what he wants. So Obama and Clinton and the rest are saying essentially terrorism works. You want to shut us up? Then riot and kill, and we will shut up. But the implications of that are very, 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 very negative. Freedom of speech is our fundamental bulwark against tyranny. Without the freedom of speech, we have no way to stand up against a tyrannical ruler. We have no way to engage in legitimate and genuine political dissent. And if we do not have that right, then we've essentially allowed the United States to become a tyranny and allowed the Obama administration and succeeding administrations to have a free hand to do whatever they want without any legitimate opposition, because any loyal opposition that dissented from policies that they don't want dissent from could be labeled as hateful, as incitement, and shut up accordingly. Now, this may seem fantastic, this may seem outlandish, that the freedom of speech could actually be imperiled. So it's noteworthy to recall also that recently a top member of the Obama administration was being grilled by a congressional committee. And the congressman asked him, do you have any plans to institute hate speech laws? And, or will you go on record saying you don't have any plans to institute hate speech laws? Will you say that there will be no hate speech laws in the United States, no incitement to hatred laws, and so on, because these have such a chilling effect on the freedom of speech? And the administration official, the Assistant Attorney General, would not commit to this. He would not say that the Obama administration has no plans to bring hate speech laws to the United States. Now, many people at this point will say, well, wait a minute. We have the First Amendment. The Obama administration may wish that the First Amendment weren't there, but they can't get rid of it without a new amendment to the Constitution. Well, that's comforting. That would be nice if it were so. But consider, for example, the fact, excuse me, the fact that we have the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says that there will be no restriction of the right to keep and bear arms. And yet, try to buy a gun in New York City to defend yourself, and you will find that there are plenty of restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms, and that the right to keep and bear arms is effectively null and void in many parts of this country. Now, could that not happen to the First Amendment? I think it very easily could. Sotomayor and Kagan the two Obama administration appointees to the Supreme Court, are both on record being in favor of certain restrictions on the freedom of speech. All Barack Obama needs is 5 Supreme Court justices to make a ruling on a challenge to the First Amendment. That is, if someone were arrested for hate speech after speaking the truth about Islam and were jailed or fined or something of this kind, then he sues under the First Amendment and it goes to the Supreme Court. All Barack Obama needs is 5 justices to say, well, certainly there should be no infringement upon the freedom of speech, but hate speech is not free speech, and thus there is no protection for this kind of talk that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation finds so distasteful. Now, we're not so far from that either, because there are already hate crimes laws in the United States. Now, hate crimes laws already involve hate speech. In other words, a hate crime works like this. If I were to attack you and take your money, then that's a crime. If I were to attack you and take your money while using a racial slur against you, then that's a hate crime. And so hate crimes all depend upon speech and upon intentions. Now, here again, nobody's in favor of racial slurs or genuine hatred. But when you start making laws like this, they can become political tools in the hands of those who wish to crush dissent. And that is what is so bad about hate crimes laws, hate speech laws, incitement to hatred laws, and so on. The intent ultimately is to enforce Islamic law. Islamic law forbids non-Muslims to speak critically about, or to actually, in the exact words of a Muslim legal manual from the Shafi'i school, to mention something impermissible about Allah, Muhammad, or Islam. Criticism of Islam is forbidden on pain of death. The non-Muslims in the Islamic State, known as the dhimmis, they have this contract of protection. That's what dhimmi means, protected people living under the dhimma, the contract of protection, the zumma. The dhimmis are deprived of basic rights, but they are allowed to live as non-Muslims within the Islamic State as long as they submit to the humiliating and discriminatory regulations that go along with their status as renegades from Allah. But if they dare to mention something impermissible about Allah, Muhammad, or Islam, then their lives are forfeit. Now, the goal of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and other Islamic groups around the world is, in accord with the Quran and in accord with the teachings of Muhammad, to bring Islamic law to the whole world. And this is perfectly reasonable. They think that it's the law of God. They think that it is the perfect ordering for society, and they believe they have a divine responsibility to work to bring it to the West. They have a responsibility to bring it above all to the United States, because the United States, with its vision of a free society, is the foremost alternative and opponent to Islamic law in the world today. Communism is, aside from in American university campuses, essentially a spent force ideologically. But Islamic law still is a very viable and growing thing, and it sees the American model as its foremost opponent. And so it is above all imperative to silence Americans when they speak critically about Islam or jihad or any kind of manifestation of Islamic supremacism. It is above all important to destroy the freedom of speech of the West, not only so as to silence those who are trying to stop the advance of the jihad and the advance of Islamic supremacism in the West, but also to bring this Sharia provision to the West and to bring ultimately bring more Sharia provisions in the wake of that one, so that ultimately the goal will be that the United States will be a Sharia state. Now, this may seem fanciful. It certainly is fanciful that the United States would become a full-fledged Sharia state, but it is not at all fanciful that the First Amendment could go and could go quickly. Imagine this scenario. It's, say, February 27th, 2013. That's only a few months away. I picked the date because it's the anniversary of the Reichstag fire in Germany, which was used by the Nazi regime, which was very new at that time, to arrogate sweeping powers to itself and thereby to destroy the fledgling German democracy that it had taken advantage of in order to gain power, and to impose a dictatorship. So February 27th, 2013, imagine Barack Obama, newly reelected, back in office for 2 months into his second term, or actually just over a month, and he awakens one morning to news that Muslims in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Indonesia, Egypt, and elsewhere are rioting again and storming U.S. embassies and tearing down the American flag and raising the black flag of jihad. They're in a rage, let's say, over a book. Maybe say a book that depicts Muhammad as waging war against his enemies, consummating a marriage with a 9-year-old girl, raining down curses upon Jews and Christians and others. In other words, a book that would be quite accurate about Muhammad as depicted in the traditional Muslim sources, a book that would speak honestly and truthfully about what the earliest Muslim sources say about what Muhammad said and did. Like, for example, my own biography of Muhammad from the earliest Muslim sources, The Truth About Muhammad. So say that in any case, this touches off these riots, and Obama goes on television, and he says something like this. He says, "This book is reprehensible and disgusting. It does not represent, excuse me, it does not represent the position of the government of the United States, and we condemn it in the strongest possible terms. This unseemly provocation of the noble believers in the Holy Quran has to end. This is America. We are better than this. We are not a people who condone hate. We are a people who offer a welcoming, helping hand to those in need. And it is high time that we afford religious minorities the same protections that we strive so hard to provide to racial minorities." And so they quickly draft a law that would criminalize, in quote, "the use of any means to broadcast, write, produce, publish, or distribute material that encourages or incites terrorism, including a website and public speaking, and of material that incites hatred that is likely to lead to violence against or stigmatization of a specific group." Now, here again, this is just a theoretical thought experiment, a fantasy, but consider this. The text of the law that I just read out is actually based on a new provision in Canada that bars people from entering Canada if they are broadcasting, writing, producing, or publishing material that encourages or incites terrorism, and producing material that incites hatred that is likely to lead to violence against or stigmatization of a specific group. Now, Muslim groups, ever since the bombing of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, have made very canny use of America's phobias against bigotry and racism by characterizing any accurate examination of how jihadis use the texts and teachings of Islam to justify violence as bigotry and racism. And so the idea that we are outlawing material that would incite hatred or stigmatization of a particular group, that's exactly what Islamic supremacist groups in the United States and Canada and Western Europe have been charging for years that those of us who oppose the jihad are doing. That to oppose the jihad is to stigmatize all Muslims. Now, of course, the obvious goal of this kind of talk is to silence those who speak about Islam and jihad so that the jihad can proceed untrammeled. But the point is that with Canada already adopting a law like this to bar people from the country who do this kind of thing, it's not at all far off to think that there could be a law in the United States as well that would criminalize this kind of activity. And then the person who decides what constitutes incitement to hatred, since the whole thing has been framed in order to protect Muslims and Islam from criticism, it's very likely that any counter-terror investigations would fall under this rubric. So imagine if Barack Obama gets such a law passed, and the international community, of course, would be thrilled. European heads of state would rush to hail him, congratulate and thanking Obama. David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, would call him far-seeing. Germany, Angela Merkel would say he's a true statesman, and the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, would say that Obama is now richly deserving of his Nobel Peace Prize, and would predict that a new era of peace and harmony between the West and the Islamic world would soon dawn. Can you see this happening? I certainly can. Ekmeladini Sanolu, the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, would announce that he's gratified that the United States has finally recognized the red lines that cannot be crossed regarding discussion of the holy figures of the world's great religions. Now, that's actually Ekmeladin Ihsanolou's exact words, are very close to them, when he said a few years ago that the West must recognize the red lines that cannot be crossed when discussing the holy figures of the world's great religions. In other words, he was saying the West has to censor itself in order not to offend Muslims. Now, if this happened, you might think, well, the mainstream media would be up in arms because certainly they will come and defend the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech, free expression. But that, unfortunately, is not the case as well. For example, you could say Eric Posner would write in Slate magazine that finally Americans have come around to the rest of the world's point of view, that there is no sense in the First Amendment, and that we need not be paralyzed by constitutional symbolism. Now, Posner actually wrote that in Slate just a few months ago in regard to the riots following the Muhammad video. Sarah Chayes in the Los Angeles Times would hail the new clarity about the distinction between speech that is simply offensive and speech that is deliberately tailored to put lives and property at immediate risk. Now, here again, Sarah Chayes did write that in the Los Angeles Times in calling for the criminalization of criticism of Islam, or essentially that. And in the Washington Post, Nathan Lean would write that the U.S. has recognized the power of our multiculturalism and will finally reach our true potential as a nation now that the voices of intolerance that wish to divide us along religious lines have been drowned out by overwhelming calls for pluralism and coexistence. Now, this billowy nonsense was actually written in the Washington Post by Nathan Lean. And the import of it is that ultimately we have to silence the critics of Islam, outlaw the freedom of speech. And so with calls for outlawing the freedom of speech coming even without laws, even without any such law being contemplated at this time, it's hardly likely that the mainstream media, if such a law did come into use, were passed, it's very unlikely that the mainstream media would raise any kind of fuss at all. And of course, Muslim leaders in the U.S. would be very pleased as well. Take these quotes that are also real quotes. Harris Taran of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, heralding the imminent demise of what he called the hate-mongering industry in the United States that sees Islam as the problem. Of course, Harris Taran has never engaged in any kind of honest discussion about the fact that the Islamic jihadis themselves point to the Quran and point to the teachings of Muhammad in order to justify the violence that they perpetrate. And so that's why anybody sees Islam as the problem, because the Islamic jihadis who are blowing themselves up and killing infidels identify Islam as the root cause. But this whole exercise in the restriction of the freedom of speech is designed to obfuscate that fact and make it something that is beyond the ken, beyond the understanding of the average American. Imam Husham al-Husseini of the Karbala Islamic Educational Center in Dearborn, Michigan, where this program is coming to you now, from which this program is coming to you now, expresses his satisfaction that the U.S. has finally put a law not to insult a spiritual leader, which is something he actually called for in the wake of the riots over the Muhammad video. Muhammad Qatanani of the Islamic Center of Passaic County, New Jersey, a good friend of Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, he said that we as Americans have to put limits on and borders on the freedom of speech, recognizing that non-Muslims have no right to talk about Muslim holy issues, as doing so will incite hatred or war among people. Yes, he really said that. He really is saying that non-Muslims ought not to be able to speak about Islam in the United States in 2012. So imagine if this law were passed. A few roadblocks might still remain. Some radio hosts might object, but then local stations would drop their programs for fear of losing their advertisers and FCC licenses. Maybe the Republicans would object. But imagine this. John Boehner, the House Minority Leader by this time, the House Majority Leader, John Boehner, Speaker of the House, says, look, I agree with the President that the Muhammad book is reprehensible and disgusting, and I don't condone hate speech in any way, shape, or form. but I'm concerned about the First Amendment implications of this bill. Now imagine if Boehner said that. What would happen then? Well, maybe a firestorm in the press, a series of articles and various feature stories showing the Republicans to be in favor of hate speech, the party of hate, the party of division, and then I expect that Boehner would then back down and support such a bill. The Supreme Court would take it and vote that the 5-4 or 6-3 maybe, that hate speech is not subject to First Amendment protections. Then what would happen? Well, this program would be off the air. ABN would probably be off the air. Books about Muhammad or Islam that speak the truth about how he called his followers to make war against and subjugate non-Muslims under the rule of Islamic law would disappear from bookshelves. Websites tracking jihad terror activities, such as my own jihadwatch.org and others, would be shut down. And then there would be an uproar, wouldn't there be? Wouldn't people protest and say, wait a minute, these things are true? Well, truth has already been shown not to be a defense in hate speech trials in Europe and Australia. The idea that anybody would stand up for counter-jihad sites being shut down flies in the face of the fact that for years now, people on the so-called conservative side have been afraid to discuss honestly the root causes of jihad terrorism within Islam and Islamic teaching, for fear of offending the politically correct sensibilities that rule the day and of appearing as anti-Muslim and so on. And so it would probably be dismissed that these people were just hate mongers, and so they're shut down. It's a good thing, good riddance. But it wouldn't just stop with them. Then when the mainstream media even began to report accurately about jihad terror activity, they too would find themselves running afoul of the new restrictions and would learn to toe the line. After all, they have been very, very careful not to ever link jihad with Islam, jihad terrorism with Islam, terrorist attacks and murders with Islam for many years now. And it's part of the guidelines of the Society of Professional Journalists not to do so. And so they would fall into line. And then the Sharia demands would not stop. They would continue. They would grow. There would be more. The problem with Sharia is that once you start to accommodate it, there's always more Sharia to accommodate. And so once the freedom of speech were jettisoned, the Islamic supremacists would know that the West was ripe for the plucking, that there was no dissent that could be made anyway against the advance of jihad and Sharia, and there would be more demands for accommodation of other elements of Islamic law, until finally the United States were indeed a Sharia state, an Islamic state, or the whole country would be engulfed in conflict as free people decided not to go quietly into the night. But the war on free speech would be the beginning, if it succeeds, of the war on many, many others of our freedoms. Islamic law, of course, forbids the freedom of conscience, the idea of a person being able to change from one religion to another, or to have no religion at all. Islam mandates the death penalty for those who dare to leave Islam. Also, the equality of rights of women with men before the law. This is something that would also have to go. So the death of free speech would be the heralding of a fundamental transformation in our society, and not one for the good. Could it happen? Most people will still say, very unlikely. I certainly hope they're right. I certainly hope that they are more far-seeing than I am, and that this is an unfounded fear. But the way the Obama administration behaved during its first term indicated that it was no great fan and no great friend of the freedom of speech. And now it has 4 more years to work its will on the American people. I shudder to think what the United States will look like in 2016, but I'm afraid we're going to find out. Now, the freedom of speech also involves a great deal more in terms of societal self-censorship and restrictions. And we'll be discussing that and much more with Pamela Geller after we come back after this break.
You are watching ABN.
Hi, this is David Wood from Jesus or Muhammad. As I'm sure you've heard, ABN has some significant financial needs. A lot of the equipment here is either outdated or damaged, and it's affecting the broadcast. I'll say ABN does a great job with what they have, but they could be doing much more if they had some newer equipment, some newer cameras. And so I encourage everyone to support the work that's going on here. We'd like to have more broadcasts, more shows, more programs, and we can only do that through financial donations. And so I encourage everyone out there to contribute whatever you can. And beyond all of this, apart from the technical needs, there's also the security needs given the increase in threats. And so if ABN is going to continue carrying on this work, they're going to need your support as they always have. And so as as we end out the year and you're thinking about where you'd like to donate, I don't think you'll find a better place than ABN.
If you'd like to support ABN's ministry, you can give us a call at 248-416-1300, or you can visit our website at www.abnsat.com. ABN appreciates your support and donations.
Good evening, welcome back. This is ABN's Jihad Watch show, and I'm Robert Spencer, and tonight we are discussing the war on free speech and how very close we are, far closer than most people realize, to losing this fundamental protection and the foremost of our freedoms. Please call in 248-416-1300 with questions or comments. And now I understand that we have ready one of the foremost champions of the freedom of speech today, and one of its fiercest, most articulate, and most passionate defenders, and one of its most effective defenders, Pamela Geller, my colleague in the American Freedom Defense Initiative. Pamela, are you with us?
I am.
Hello.
With you, Robert.
There you are. Hello. And
Hello.
so,
how are you?
Just great. How are you?
Well, I'm wonderful. It's an honor to be on your show. You are to counter Jihad television what Bob Hope was to the USO. So I'm very privileged to be
Well, the honor is all mine, I assure you. And we've been discussing in the first half hour the war on free speech. and how the Obama administration has signed on to the UN Resolution 1618, calling upon member states to criminalize what it called incitement to religious hatred, and how the Benghazi consulate attack, jihad attack, was covered up. But not just the fact that it was covered up is important, but that it was covered up in a way that it was an attack on the U.S. freedom of speech. And so I'm wondering if you have comments on just how close we are to losing the freedom of speech and how catastrophic that would be for free societies.
Well, Obama's response to Benghazi and to the Cairo, the taking down of the American flag and the raising of the Jihad Watch, the flag of jihad, was really political exploitation at its worst. I mean, to say he's a political animal would be understating it. That he would take an attack on the United States of America, an attack on, and again, we're not really quite sure what the attack was on. I don't mean to be coy, but it was not a consulate. We don't know what exactly was going on in that compound in a residential neighborhood with little to no security. There's talk that it was a CIA op. There's talk that they were running weapons through there. Maybe that's part of the reason why there's all this obfuscation and distraction. But that said, that notwithstanding, the fact that he would take an attack on our compound, the slaughter of our fellow Americans, those in the service of the U.S. government, and take the opportunity to take an attack on this country and attack our basic unalienable rights is astonishing. It is astounding. Only thing that compounds that astonishment is the media's complicity in the cover-up and not calling him out on this, I think, most egregious attack on our freedoms. And, you know, Benghazi is merely, you know, part of the ongoing assault. As you know, these ads that we have been running and have attempted to run in cities all over this country, ads where anti-Israel ads were running, were met with fierce resistance. We expanded the campaign, as you know, to include the Coptic Christians. This is now running on the back of New York City buses. In any war on the between the civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man, support the cops, defeat jihad. An enormous amount of resistance to these ads, so much so that we had to sue. So of course it does warm the cockles of my heart that now the Washington Metro Transit Authority had to reimburse our lawyers, the American Freedom Law Center, their legal fees in this battle, because that's the law. People don't realize, but if you have to fight for your freedom of speech and the government loses, they have to reimburse your legal fees. But this is not just one case. This is one of many, many cases, and it's only getting worse. Here, the Muslim Brotherhood groups in America are running a Quranic chapter and verse on ads that are been placed in the Washington train platforms, Washington Metro. And so we submitted our Quran ads. Okay, these were our Quran ads. Soon shall we cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, which is cited, by the way, by many of the 9/11 Muslim terrorists. And I am still waiting. It's now a month and a half in New York to run these ads. Now, CAT can always run their ads, which are abrogated verse that doesn't even, frankly, you know, they aren't even valid anymore. You know, and they have absolutely no problem running their assembling and their obfuscation and their outright propaganda. But when we try to counter the message with, you know, actual facts and truth, we're stopped at every turn. And the battle is enormous. The tide is overwhelmingly against us. And part of the problem, I think, is that the American people haven't a clue as to what's going on. They're losing their freedoms, and it's either apathy or cluelessness, whatever. It's freedom. My God, it's the most precious gift on earth. That one can be apathetic about it. I'm just plain sick of the apathy. And so few are fighting the battles. And of course, like you, Robert, those of us that are fighting the battles are demonized, marginalized, rendered radioactive. Our ability to, our names and our reputations are destroyed. And this is part of the war. The war is to destroy the most effective freedom fighters. So, yes, it is from on high. Obama and Benghazi and the resolution at the UN co-sponsored with Egypt, first time in American history. But it's also in the nuts and the bolts of everyday life. And I share your concern about hate speech laws, hate speech legislation, really pounding the final nail in the coffin of free speech.
Well, you've touched on a very important point, that there is an initiative from the top down, from the OIC, from Barack Obama, from Hillary Clinton and others, that's clearly against the freedom of speech. But then there's also this parallel motion by the mainstream media to shut down, to defame, to discredit those who are standing against the jihad, and likewise to censor themselves so that you never could get out of AP or Reuters or one of the others any kind of really accurate analysis of the ideology that is rooted within Islam that leads to violence and supremacism. Now, this is really paradoxical when you think about it, that the champions of the free press, the foremost exponents of the free press, the people whose livelihoods depend upon the freedom of the press, would be so completely in the tank for self-censorship and for the voluntary restriction of their own freedom of speech when it comes to the jihad threat. Now, why on earth is that? What's in it for them? What do you think is going on there?
Their ideology, all the way back to the New York Times exaltation, Durante of Stalin, Stalinism, communism, and so forth. I mean, was there freedom of the press in communist Russia? So why would the New York Times then, sing the praises of such a totalitarian and stifling and suffocating and slave-like system of governance? Because the left loves to control the people. Because the left are collectivists, they're statists, they're the opposite of the very idea of America, which of course is individual rights. So I see it as being consistent to their ideology, and frankly, what better way to control the people than the Sharia? I mean, the Sharia governs every basic aspect of daily human life, and it asserts authority over non-Muslims. That's the key there, asserts authority over non-Muslims. It's the boss of you, in other words. And so they love the control. And so I think it stems from that. I don't think, whether they're clueless or they're complicit is irrelevant to me, because the end result is the same. And they are self-enforcing the Sharia. They certainly don't pay that kind of respect to Christianity or to Judaism or to Hindu, Sikh, so on and so forth. And I think that people need to understand why they so viciously attack you and me and, Ibn Warwick and Wafa, because it is absolutely elemental to their strategy that they destroy the most effective champions of freedom. Because if you destroy my name and you destroy my reputation and you polarize me, then anything that comes out of my mouth is going to be suspect. I don't think people will even wait to hear what will come out of my mouth, because they've already marginalized the brand of Geller, for example, or Spencer, or any other really effective, counter-jihad voice. And so that's what the media does. Every attack on me is an ad hominem attack. The attacks are never intellectual. There's never any intellectual debate. There's no, diversity of thought or diversity of opinion. It's always, anti-Muslim, hater, according to the incredibly subversive Southern Poverty Law Center, little old me, is 5 hate groups. Not one, I'm 5. You can't heap enough on my shoulders. And still, even so, with this campaign year in, year out, this is going on for, close to a decade, people know, people that care, people know that something is very, very wrong, fundamentally wrong, that we are going off on a very dangerous a path towards they don't know what. And so despite the overwhelming, the blocking of us, I know you're blocked, I know I'm blocked on not only, you know, most business filters block us out, but we're now blocked on most of the government sites. The DHS can't see my blog if you're working there. I know this because they wrote to me. Most of this happened after Obama came into office. And on military bases in Europe, in Germany, in Afghanistan, you can't get us. Now, they have ways of getting around it, and oh, isn't that so cute and funny and American ingenuity and all that stuff. But I think it speaks to, again, this drip, 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 this encroaching, you know, restriction on free speech. You don't just wake up one morning and you can't speak. It's a process. And I think we're in the throes, really, really deep in the throes of the process. Yeah.
That's very disturbing. And yeah, that's a very important point. You know, I've been reading a lot about Nazi Germany lately, and it's really astonishing how swiftly German democracy collapsed and how quickly, just within a matter of weeks and months, Hitler was able to impose a dictatorship. But that was a country that did not have a strong democratic tradition, and that in which there were, and in Germany at that time, there were many calls, and not just from the Nazis, for the installation of a dictatorship. And so authoritarian rule was something that the Germans were used to, and something that many of them wanted and preferred to a democracy. In the United States, on the other hand, we have a democratic tradition stretching back now over 200 years, and no tradition of authoritarian rule, and no desire for it. And so it all has to happen gradually. It has to happen gradually and behind the backs of most people, couched in these phrases that they use, like what I was discussing in the first half hour, the incitement to religious hatred and the idea of hate speech in general, the idea that you or I would be, what we are doing would constitute hate speech is a prime example, that in defending the freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, the equality of rights of all people before the law, that anybody would call this hate speech is an indication of just how clever and insidious this campaign has been, inverting reality and charging the haters with casting the haters, I should say, as being the ones who are the tolerant and loving ones, and the ones who are inclusive and so on, and casting the defenders of freedom as the haters. But this has been done, as you say, drip, 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 gradually, and away from the awareness of most people. And one other thing struck me about what you were saying, that you said that the left has this collectivist authoritarian impulse, and certainly they're driving a lot of this. But what about the right? Surely on the right there are a great many prominent and articulate defenders of the freedom of speech who are sticking up for those who are on the front lines in trying to resist the jihad. Isn't that right?
No, it's not right.
No.
No, the right has, I think, capitulated to the pressure of the culture. The culture is obviously most assuredly left. I mean, it's not just the media. It's television, it's movies, it's music. I mean, we're overwhelmed with this sort of inculcation. It's why we've lost a generation. But the right, unlike the left, who has become more left and more fierce, no matter how staggering the loss, you know, it didn't matter. They stuck to their lefty guns, as it were. The right, on the other hand, anytime there's a setback, moves increasingly to the left, to the center. And so they've also showed a utter lack of conviction, of spine, when it comes to those of us on the right that do dare to speak, well, truth to power, as much as I hate that expression. We see over and over again, anytime the left attempts to smear anyone on the right, and they always will go after the most effective. I mean, all the way, I mean, the perfect example is Sarah Palin. I mean, they destroyed that woman, and this woman was as close to perfect as you're going to get. I mean, just if we could just look at a textbook for a second. Here was a woman, not part of the Bush dynasty or the Clinton dynasty or just any dynasty, just a Horatio Alger story. You know, hardworking, marries, has a load of kids, PTA, city council, mayor. You know, does it really the right way, governor, and then she's on the Oil and Gas Commission, and the old boys, the Republican boys, are, you know, they got their old boy games going on, their skullduggery. She won't go along. She resigns. Becomes governor, 85% approval rating. My point is, she was golden, and they destroyed her. And the right let the left destroy her. And this is what the right does. We do not, I mean, why can't we take the lessons, the most effective lessons from the left? Not the evil, no, not the evil, but the tactics, and apply it to the good. That's who we are. We are the good. We are the righteous. And we don't see that at all. What we see is, on the left, no matter what the charge is, whether it's Barney Frank and he's running a gay prostitution ring out of his house, or it's McGree, it doesn't matter. Ted Kennedy, they circle the wagons. The right, on the other hand, yeah, they go in a circular firing squad. They abandon their most effective leader, and then they wring their hands, and they don't understand why McCain is their candidate. You know, why we get a mealy-mouthed sort of, you know, left of, you know, well, let's say center left kind of a candidate, because they've already killed all of our effective leaders. And worse than that is the infiltration on our side. We have seen repeatedly I consider the most influential, the most powerful conservative influence peddler to be Grover Norquist. Now we know that we know who Grover is. We know what he is. We know his contacts. We ran those checks from Alamoudi, Abdurrahman Alamoudi, who is heavily tied, who's serving time for his terrorist connections to Al-Qaeda. And yet he has enormous influence. He's embraced by the right, along with his Muslim Brotherhood sidekick, Suhail Khan. They have a lot of power. We see when we do an event. I mean, you and I put together an event at CPAC every year because they don't cover jihad. Why don't they cover jihad? Because Grover and Suhail are on the board, and they just won't allow it. So we take our own space, our own money, and we go there because 12,000 conservatives come to that event, and they don't know that their leadership has been compromised. So I think this is a very big problem. I think that's the reason why the Brotherhood and Islamic supremacism has managed such leaping, galloping advances, was because of the vacuum on the right. I see no hope for that except in the loss. The only hope I see is in this rout, and you could say whatever you want, but this last election was a rout. We got our butts kicked. And so if that doesn't, you know, if that doesn't force the party to look inward, then we're done as a party. And so I don't know if it's going to take a new party, like the Republicans of Lincoln. I don't know, but I do know that the last thing we should be doing now is, you know, engaging, you know, with the left. No. The left voted for Obama, and they voted for Obamacare, and they voted for the Muslim Brotherhood, and they voted for $16 trillion worth of deficits. They own it. Let's not get in their way. You know, Napoleon said, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. They own it. In the meantime, what we should be doing is we should be remaking the Republican right into a fierce, pro-capitalist, pro-individualist, pro-freedom party. Back to our roots, which are timeless and stellar and classic and righteous, and prepare for the oncoming war. That's what we should be doing.
Absolutely. And Grover must go. In any
Yes.
case, we have a caller. Isa, are you with us?
Good evening, Robert. How are you?
Just great. Thanks for calling.
I seem to have a different view on this. I see it more. It's more than just attack on speech. It's the beginning of it. But I looked deeper into it. It looks like certain powers are trying to unite all these different fragments together, whether it's Islam, democracy, socialism. You know, it's like having a fox, a hyena, and a wolf in one place. It seems like you try to incorporate all these ideologies and live and let live. Everybody leave each other alone. And you know, that makes me even more faithful in the Bible than ever before. You know, peace and comfort, they speak, peace and comfort. Let's hold each other's hand and everybody live and let live. But when I look in the Islamic world, I believe the extremists, when they get in the right position, in the right place, they will prevail over the Muslims. And they will have the word and the say in the end. That's what I see what happened in Egypt. And all of a sudden they turn on Morsi, they turn on Gaddafi. I mean, what's going on here? This is more than about America. It's about like uniting the world under one government, one law. This is what I see. But it's not going to work. Peace and comfort, they say. I go with the Bible. I hear so many different sides of this issue and all that stuff. Not going to get along. They just will not get along because it's like I said, you got the fox, the hyena, and the wolf trying to make a pact together.
Well, I certainly hope you're right that they won't be able to get along ultimately. There's a great deal of accuracy in what you're saying, of course, that this is anti-freedom of speech initiative is part of a larger initiative, and it coincides with the caliphate aspirations, the attempts by, or the hopes of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis and other groups in North Africa and the Middle East to unite the Muslim countries under the rule of a caliph, who would then, of course, under Sunni Islamic law, the caliph is the only one authorized to declare offensive jihad, and then offensive jihad would indeed be declared against the United States and other countries as well, of course, notably Israel first. Now, in any case, the idea that that is part of a larger initiative, I think, is clear and is manifest. The one thing that I would say, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, but the one thing that I would say is that when I speak to Christian groups around the country, I generally find that there is what I believe to be an alarming level of passivism. That they say, well, Jesus is going to come back and conquer all evil, and so it's all in his hands. Well, the fact is that there's nothing in the New Testament, there's nothing in the Old Testament that says that the believers in God should sit back and wait for God to take care of everything. And in terms of Christianity, there have been many, many places in the world, notably in the Middle East, where there were countries that were 99% Christian with a strong Christian tradition that were completely overwhelmed, conquered, and Islamized, notably Egypt. And so this could happen here in the United States, and the world's last bastion of freedom could be overwhelmed in the same way. And it is up to Christians and all people who are free and all people of conscience to work together to do everything they can to try to keep that from happening. And while it's the truth of the Bible is one thing, to just sit back and say, well, we know that all things are going to work out in the end, is never something that Christians are called to do. Pamela, do you have any comment on that?
No, I have no comment on that, except, he says they won't get along. It's irrelevant. Each one thinks they're going to win. The left clearly thinks they'll be able to, once they triumph here in America, they'll be able to co-opt Islam. And Islam basically is laughing, with blood that the left, just as they have repeatedly been used as tools, as we witnessed in Egypt. But by that time, it's not an interesting game, because freedom, in either case, is lost. So who wins are the bad guys? Who cares? I mean, seriously. They both share many similarities. There are many similarities between Islam and socialism and communism. There is no such thing as individualism, individual rights under Islam. There's no such thing as a unique soul under Islam. They have more in common than you know. It would just be a matter of, who would be, in power. But it's six or one half dozen of another. The fight is individualism versus collectivism. And in this case, the collectivism is both Islam and it's communism and it's socialism and it's versus the individual rights. And, and that's it. And that's the battle. Whatever costume it's wearing, whatever century it's in, it's as old as time. And I think that it's not understood in those terms, and I think that that's part of the problem.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very important insight about the deep ideological connection between the left and the Islamic supremacists. That's a connection that very few people are aware of, and not many people have made. That they both are essentially authoritarians or totalitarians who are collectivists who wish to reorder society in a way that they hold to be perfect, and will carry out a reign of terror against those who oppose their vision of a perfect society. And so, that's why they get along so well. They see eye to eye on these things. We are going to now take a break, and we'll be back after these messages. Do call in and talk to us about these very important issues. And we will be right back with Pamela Geller and more on the war on free speech after this.
Hello, this is Sam Shamoon from the Jesus or Muhammad Show, one half of the team with David Wood. I'm here exhorting my brothers and sisters in the Lord Jesus Christ who've been blessed by the programs at ABN, especially by the Jesus or Muhammad Show, to consider and prayerfully consider to partner with us financially, because as you know, ABN is a viewer-supported satellite station. In order for us to continue to broadcast the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, not just to Christians, but also to Muslims, and not just to Muslims, but to those who are sitting on the fence and are considering embracing a worldview or seeking after God, ABN wants to reach these people, but can only do so with your financial support. So I'm encouraging my brothers and sisters to come alongside ABN and make a financial contribution to continue Jesus and Muhammad and other shows with the purpose of preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, seeing Christians get strengthened in their faith, Muslims coming to saving faith in Jesus, and others turning to Christ as their only hope and Savior. But again, we cannot do this if the support does not come in to continue to broadcast these shows. So would you please consider prayerfully asking God whether He'd have you support us on a regular basis so that we continue these programs and continue to bless the people of God, preach the truth of the gospel to the non-Christians, including Muslims, so that in everything we say and do, that Jesus Christ will be glorified and that His gospel will spread throughout the entire world. Would you please join us financially? Thank you so much.
And we're back. This is ABN, Jihad Watch program. I am Robert Spencer, and we are here with one of the nation's foremost freedom fighters, Pamela Geller, discussing the war on free speech. Give us a call, 248-416-1300. That number again, 248-416-1300. Give us a call. Let us know what you think. Speak your mind while you still can, because if Barack Obama gets his way, we might not be able to do this much longer. Now, Pamela Geller, we were speaking earlier about your ad campaigns and about your very controversial signs on buses and in subways that say in any conflict between the civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man, defeat jihad, with various groups, support Israel, support the Copts, support Nigerian Christians, and so on. I can't quite make that one out, but in any case, there are quite a few variations on it. And the question is, why do you think that these rather straightforward statements of fact, that that the jihadis are indeed savage, and that we should support the civilized man against the savage, why the furious controversy?
Well, because they're blasphemous. These ads are blasphemous. Under the Sharia, you cannot criticize, you cannot insult, you cannot offend Islam, even if it's true. The idea of slander under Islam is completely different than the Western idea. In the West, there has to be, and mind you, in the U.S. it's very difficult to prove. There has to be malicious intent, it has to be false, and it's a very high standard. Under Islam, it can be true, but if it insults a Muslim, then it's blasphemy. And so these ads are blasphemous, and what you're seeing is the enforcement of the blasphemy laws under the Sharia. Of course, it was absurdly and monstrously amusing to have this battle rage while the Hamas is dragging human beings in the street as Israeli collaborators or friends. That was their crime. So they executed them and dragged their bodies in the streets. And so I guess the definition of savagery is constantly being, I don't know, reevaluated by those on the left. I don't believe in that. I believe there are certain absolutes, and I believe the definition of savagery is crystal clear. And that is very much the definition of savagery, just the way the beheading of Daniel Pearl was savage, and Nicholas Berg, and, you know, the targeting of tens of thousands of Israelis in southern Lebanon by tens of thousands of rockets. The Coptic Christians in Egypt, the persecution, the oppression, the constant state of terror that they live in. Today's slaughter of 20 Nigerian young female students in their college dorm at university because they wore skirts and slacks. So this is savagery, and you know, I mean, we could split hairs, but it is what it is. And I'm deeply troubled by President Obama's refusal in the case of Boko Haram, which means books are bad or Western education is bad. A terrorist group in Nigeria that is just slaughtering Christians in Nigeria. I'm deeply disturbed by his refusal to designate them as a terrorist group.
It is rather astonishing when you consider that he's so quick to label so-called right-wing extremists as terrorists, that Boko Haram, that has burned churches and massacred Christians and is gleefully open about doing so in the name of Islam, that they're not a terrorist organization according to Barack Obama. It's indicative of his priorities, his values, and his true agenda.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's debased. It is savage in its way, and the refusal to address the ideology is, we're signing our own, you know, civilizational death warrant, because you cannot solve a problem if you cannot diagnose a problem. You can't solve a problem if you can't speak of it, and this is what we see recurring. It's, you know, it's endless, and any time he does weigh in, it's always to side with the savages. We're seeing this, of course, in Burma. The same pattern, it's the same repetitious pattern over and over again, where, any level of Islamic immigration is directly tied to a level of conflict. When the the numbers are very, very low, there's the Muslim population is tranquil, relatively. And as the numbers grow, so does the conflict and the demands and the demand for accommodation, and then, of course, the violent agitation. And this is everywhere. I mean, are we not seeing this very same thing in Thailand? Just yesterday, I think I published a story on over 100 schools had to be closed because of the ongoing Islamic violence and intimidation and violence. It's and the bad guys are those of us, the few, and increasingly fewer and fewer. Bloggers, citizens journalists, writers, authors, that point it out. That's all we're doing, is pointing it out. We never say, oh, Muslims are bad. We never say that. They say that when they accuse us. That's what they're saying. And I don't know why no one holds them to account on that note. Even saying my ads were Islamophobic. When I ran this particular ad, and of course the number increases every day, so these ads are always subject to change, 19,700 deadly Islamic attacks since 9/11. It's not Islamophobia, it's Islamorealism. Now, I had a hard time getting these ads up as well, and when they went up, I was accused of being a racist. Well, again, jihad in Islam is not a race. And they also accused me of running these anti-Muslim ads. And the implication there is that all Muslims support these acts of jihad. Now, how come they're not accused of being Islamophobic, a word that I don't even think is I think is a complete fiction. It's a complete fiction. It's part of this machine to crush the voices of freedom by labeling any criticism of Islam as Islamophobia. I mean, were the Americans jumping out of the windows of the World Trade Centers on 9/11, were they Islamophobic? It's so stupid. It's such an insult to the everyman, to the common man's intelligence. And yet, everybody talks about it like the emperor's new clothes. Yes, it's Islamophobic. Oh, it's so Islamophobic. Well, people are being, millions of people slaughtered, dying. Women are subjugated, oppressed. I mean, it's a horror, and it's like theater of the absurd.
Very much so. Now, you had very ably explained why the word savage is apt. And it's also worth noting that the people who were raining down condemnations upon you, and of course we're talking about national press, CNN and NBC and New York Times and the Washington Post, and so many others saying these ads are racist and offensive and so on because they use the word savage. It's worth noting that the New York Times, of course, as you pointed out in a recent column, published a piece by a Tunisian citizen calling the Tunisian Islamic supremacists bearded savages. And the New York Times published that without any kind of caveat or complaint. Mona El-Tahawi, the CNN pseudo-journalist who spray-painted your ad, did not go and spray-paint the New York Times as a result of their having called these jihadi savages. The Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, called the attackers in Benghazi a small and savage group. Nobody called her a racist. Nobody went and spray-painted the State Department. Nobody minded. And, of course, most recently, the incident that you referred to, the Palestinian jihadis dragging the corpses of people they had murdered behind them through the streets on motorcycles. The New York Daily News and the New York Post both ran front-page headlines, "Savages," with the picture of the body being dragged behind the motorcycle. And so it seems as if some people are allowed to call the jihadi savages and some are not. And it just highlights the purpose of the campaign is really not to protect Americans against so-called racism or bigotry, and not to try to root such racism and bigotry out of the society, but simply to silence freedom fighters and to silence foes of jihad.
Absolutely. I mean, to add to what you've just said, with the New York Post and the Daily News on the front page, I mean, and it was just one giant word, savages, you know. Mind you, there were no mea culpas by these same journalists who had excoriated my work, me, you know, the whole campaign. There was nothing. There was no apology. There was no, I mean, for me, of course, it was vindication, because it was what it was, you know. It was gorgeous. But again, you didn't see anyone, not one of the vast army of tools and puppets and quislings revisit their criticism of the ad campaign. Not one.
Amazing. Now, this hypocrisy, do you think that they're aware of this hypocrisy? Do you think that they ever, does anybody ever think, well, Pamela Geller can't use this word, but we can? Or do you think that this is just simply some kind of an unconscious thing that's so deep that their prejudices and their biases and their skewed perspectives are so deeply rooted in their psyches that they don't even realize how inconsistent they're being?
That. Yeah, that's what I think. I think just as we saw when Dan Rather had used falsified documents in an attempt to change up the election right before the Kerry Bush presidential election, and if you recall, they had used false documents of Bush's national service record, and it was bloggers and readers of these blogs that had outed Dan Rather, the gold standard of journalism, and exposed the false documents. And what was the left's response? The left's response was false but accurate. Like, it didn't matter. It didn't matter that these documents had been altered, that it was all a lie, that this. The fact is, even though the documents are wrong, it's still true. And that is what I see. I think that's a perfect example of what you see in this particular, and every situation. I mean, frankly, I've been excoriated for my position on everything. And I've been right about everything.
So in a certain sense...
I was raked over the coals because, and you were too, because I was saying on January 25th, 2011, this is the Muslim Brotherhood. So they're gonna come in, Karzai's gonna come back. This is good. And I was reamed, Salam, the blogger who still loves Mubarak, and all this stuff. Never saw a mea culpa there. Mm-hmm. You never saw them revisit any of that there. And it's interesting because even this last Thanksgiving, I had written a story, and it started quite a tumult about the turkeys that, much of the meat that's produced in this country is halal. It's not labeled. It's not because they're doing it to adhere to the Sharia. It's a cost-cutting measure. For them to separate the two is more expensive. So it's all halal, and they don't label it. Well, I had done a story on this, and, because Butterball was everyone was halal, every turkey. Mm-hmm. And it created quite a furor. And, of course, the left came after me, Geller's terror turkeys, just don't ask. It was madness. And
well,
yet,
we have another caller, so let's go to the line. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, caller, but are you there?
Yes. Hi, Pam and Dave.
Nabil.
Yes. Yes, I really like the analysis you're saying. It is wonderful, and I agree with everything you are saying. You are actually saying it really politely and very nice. My concern here, right now the Obama administration infiltrated with Muslim Brotherhood. And he got the Nobel Prize for trying to make peace, appeasing to the Muslims. And this this Nobel Prize should be taken away from him because he created the biggest mess and bigger terrorist group in the world. The other thing is, what is he seeing in Islam to promote Islam inside the United States? We should have, I ask you and Pamela to draft or put on your website a letter or just a short paragraph so we all can submit it to our senators and congressmen, says no, and we must have the freedom and freedom of speech. When you say something about Islam, explaining what Islam is calling, that's not hate.
Yeah,
We're
you're quite right.
You're explaining.
This is just the insanity of the public discourse today. That, if we did send such a letter and a few thousand people signed it, the problem is that money talks, and that when these people are bought by the Muslim Brotherhood, then they carry more weight than the signatures of a few thousand Americans. It's unfortunate but true. I believe that a great deal that's behind this is that the Muslim Brotherhood co-opts these politicians with all they have so much money. The Saudis have oil money and so on, and so they can do whatever they want. But anyway, let's see what Pamela thinks about that. And Pamela, do you think, first off, should Barack Obama's Nobel Prize be rescinded?
Well, he shouldn't have gotten it in the first place. He only got it because he got elected. He got that Nobel Prize, what was it, how many months after he was elected? He hadn't done anything except go to Egypt on his apology tour, and he made that ridiculous submission speech at Cairo Al-Azhar University. Look, Robert and I do that every day on our websites, and we have a very, I know I can't speak for Robert's readership. My readership is very actively involved. They're not passive. When we're involved, engaged in any particular situation, any particular alert, they get on it, they mail their congressman. But this is part of the problem, the Grover problem. Because Grover, who's very influential on the right, I've all but given up on the left. There's nothing to discuss there. They're finished. They're the party of destruction. But on the right, you have guys like Grover Norquist who see the up-and-comers. He's inside. He's a fixer. He sees the newbies, and he goes out there, and he schmoozes them, and he gives them money, and they don't even know that they have been bought. It's a very insidious. It's not out-and-out evil. I mean, he is, yes. But many of the people that he co-opts don't even know that they've been co-opted. It's a smooth operation, very smooth. So, again, I think that, like I said before, we have to concentrate on the right, remaking, rebuilding, rebranding, or whatever the you want to use. We have to redo the party. We have to clean out the party. We got to kick Grover Norquist and his Quisling bunch out on their buttocks.
Yes, you're quite right. And also to touch on, return to something you were saying before, I think that it's imperative for the right to begin to work together and to stop letting the left dictate who is acceptable and who isn't, and to stop just playing Me Too games with the left and acquiescing in their demonization and marginalization of voices on the right, like Sarah Palin and others that you mentioned. I mean, you were talking about Dan Rather and how they defended against the revelations that the so-called memo about George W. Bush was fake by saying it was fake but accurate. And you yourself, in being right about the Muslim Brotherhood takeover of Egypt right from the beginning in January 2011, and in being right about the use of the word savage for jihadis, and being right about the nature and magnitude of the jihad threat and so much else, you could say that you are accurate but banned, accurate but forbidden, and that the right has acquiesced in this is nothing short of criminal, that you and others who speak out about these things forthrightly and honestly are shunned by others because they're afraid of getting the same treatment that the left has given to you. And they're afraid that they will be tarred with the same brush and demonized in the same way and called a racist and a bigot. But what I think a lot of people on the right don't realize is that they're not going to be exempt. and that if a lot of the people who are speaking pleasant and comforting falsehoods about moderate Islam and so on, that, excuse me, and shunning you and people who are working with you, that if they actually were as effective as you are in changing the public discourse and forcing the mainstream media to discuss these aspects of Islam and jihad that ordinarily they try to ignore and obfuscate, then they'll get the same treatment, that nobody is exempt, and that there isn't any way to compromise with this propaganda machine that the left and the Islamic supremacists are operating, that if you stick your neck out, you'll get it cut off. That's what they do. And so it's imperative that we support one another and support people who are speaking honestly about this threat. We only have a few more minutes, but do you have any further comments about that and about the war on freedom of speech in general?
No, I absolutely agree with everything you've said. They will get their head chopped off. One only has to look when all Sarah Palin did was tweet about, peaceful Muslims, should understand that the Ground Zero Mosque is a stab in the heart. It was even softer than that. And she was vilified. Truth is prohibited. Truth is the new hate speech. Truth is toxic. And what is truth? Truth is the recognition of reality. That's all that truth is. Truth doesn't care who likes her. Truth doesn't care who doesn't like her. Truth is no less or more valid if everyone agrees with it or no one agrees with it. A is A. A is A. It is what it is. And there's no avoiding it. I mean, yes, that's exactly what people have been doing. They've been avoiding it. They've been avoiding reality. But you can't avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. And you see this is a slippery slope that increasingly snowballing, faster and faster. I mean, the changing of the world order with these whole swaths of Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East going to Islamic supremacist regimes will not end well. It's not static. Everything is fluid. Everything's moving, and it won't be pretty. It won't, not at all. Not at all.
You're quite right. I mean, if the Muslim Brotherhood, with the Muslim Brotherhood takeover in Egypt, and with the Islamic supremacists having also taken over in Libya and Tunisia, it's now abundantly clear that there never was any democratic, pluralistic Arab Spring uprising. It was always, as you and I both said at the time, an Islamic supremacist takeover. And that's clear now. But it's also not going to be without consequences. It's going to come back to us in many ways, and people are going to die as a result of it. It is something that is going to have negative consequences that are unimaginably far-reaching. And so it's not really just a matter of one person's analysis or another's being preferable. It's a matter of the fact, as you say, the consequences of reality cannot be avoided. And so the analysts that are in place in Washington and in the mainstream media have been proven wrong again and again and again and again. They never have any accountability. They never are brought to any kind of responsibility for their errors. But their errors are going to come back on us nonetheless. And if a caliphate is reestablished in North Africa and the Middle East, or even if there are simply just a series of Sharia states there, then they're going to be far more hostile to the United States and to Israel and to all free people than anything we have seen out of that region previously. So the situation is indeed very grave. The freedom of speech is imperiled. I don't know if there's even a whole lot more time for political action on this, but it is imperative for the American body politic that free people in the United States make this an issue and force candidates to speak about it and to declare themselves on these issues of whether they will be in favor of or against free speech restrictions. In any case, our time is out, and so I thank Pamela Geller for being with us once again, and this is the Jihad Watch ABN program. I'm Robert Spencer. Till next week, good night and God bless.